All right, so everybody, we're gonna trim a plate, and there's a couple different things about trimming plates that are different than other things. One is we can trim the inside, right? We don't trim the inside of cups. We don't really trim the inside of bowls, mainly because it's just hard to get a tool in there, right? And to trim the inside. And so we try to make those as good as we can throwing, and it's hard to get the trimming scraps out. And another reason is it's just better if you can throw them without having the trim. Since these are your first plates, right? Oftentimes when you touch them, they're just not feeling good. Like they're kind of bumpy, or there's like a weird lump, or something in the curve isn't right. If you look at this, right, this is really open, right? It offers you an opportunity to trim inside. You see how the tool, I can get the tool in there and I can trim, and then it's easy for me to get those trimming scraps out again. So if you really need to, we can trim this. So we're going to do a little bit of trimming, right? As you get better at making plates, you won't have to trim them anymore, and that would be awesome, right? But as a beginner, if you do whatever, or as an intermediate student, you do whatever you need to do to make this look awesome. When this is fired, no one's gonna care if you trimmed the inside, did this, did that, what steps you took to get there. You just want them to have the most awesome plate that they've ever seen, right? Made by you. Right? They're not going to ask you, did you trim the inside? Did you do this? Did you do that? You just want the experience because you want to make yourself look the best. Like, so when you turn in a paper, right? A rough draft, they don't care how many rough drafts you had to do. They just care about the end. Is your paper, your term paper good? Same thing here. We just want to make it the best. So this is one of the steps to making it the best. So how did I get this? So this is still a little wet for what I want it to be. What does that mean? That I left it out most of the day on Tuesday, and then I covered up Tuesday afternoon, and then yesterday I came in and like 6 or 7 p.m. I uncovered it and left it out till now. So it's been out, 12, 15, like 20 hours or so. Right? It's still a little bit damp. So, but those conditions change a lot, meaning if the heat's on, if it's raining outside, so that's just where we're at now. So this is still, remember where we left it, we wired it off the bat, right? And then it's still stuck on there because it's wet. If you look super closely, I don't know if you guys can actually see it, there's a little bit of a gap. Oh, for instance, you guys could see, if I get it exactly right, you can see a little bit of a gap, especially along the outside underneath here. I don't know, can you guys see it up there? There's a little bit of a gap underneath here, because what happens is as this plate dries, this outside dries a little bit faster. And so that's trying to contract. The inside part of this plate isn't drying out at all, that much. So that tries to stay the same, right? So what happens is the outside, very outside, is trying to shrink a little bit. So as it's trying to shrink, it can't go anywhere, so it curls upward. The suck. So you ever notice your sponge, when you finish washing dishes, it's flat and you put it up on the whatever by your sink, and then it dries. What happens when it dries? It curls up a little bit, right? A lot. That's because, right, sponges, when you add water, they expand, right? And when the water leaves, they contract, right? And the surface, the top surface of the sponge dries faster. So that contracts more first, right? And then hopefully maybe they'll contract later and everything gets even. Anyway, same thing's happening here, right? The top side is drying faster than the bottom. The outside is drying faster than the inside, the center. So those are all leading to things contracting, right? And it can't bow downward. It doesn't want to bow downward. The only real way it wants to bow upward. So that's why your rims, right, will pop up a little bit, because as they get harder and drier, the rims shrink, dry, come up, and then they get hard, and they don't want to flatten out again, right? Because the center is the last thing they contract. And the rim gets too hard as the center starts to contract to flatten out again. Does that make sense? That's what's going on. All right. No, I didn't. So it was too wet still. So it's a little, so the question was, have I turned it over to dry it yet? I have not. So one thing, and we'll talk about that when we get there, but it isn't dry enough. It wasn't, now's the time when I would turn it over, right? So, but it is stiff enough. You see that I can pick it up like that and it doesn't think. Now it is still wet enough that if I do that, it will flex inward, right? So it's good. It's in perfect shape. Now, since it's still attached to the bat, I can just maybe put it back onto the pins because I'm going to trim the inside, right? I need it to be centered again. So I'm going to try to see if it shifted. Let's see if it's centered now. Is this unplugged? This might be unplugged. No? Okay, it just wasn't, I wasn't pressing the pedal. All right, so you see, I got kind of lucky. You see how it's mostly centered? That's okay. So sometimes when you put it back down on the wheel, it's not centered at all. What you do is you pull your bat up and have the wheel spin 180 and then put it back down. Because sometimes it's in relationship to the pins aren't centered on the wheel head or something. And so, especially if you're at the same wheel, right? That makes sense. If you're at the same wheel, sometimes if you turn the wheel 180 degrees and it's still, all right. I'm lucky. If this didn't work and I did the 180 degree trick with the wheel head and I put it back and then that didn't work, I'd have to peel it off and then center it on a bat, a regular bat. That makes sense, but we're not going to do that. All right, so I'm feeling this. So actually, I probably don't need to do any of what I'm about to do because it feels okay, right? But if there was a lump there, like let's pretend there's a lump right here. So let's bring this close in. And then you guys can't really tell if there's a lump. There's a little bit of a lump. There's a slight lump. So I'm going to come through here and just trim out that lump. You can see how wet this middle clay is because you see how I can wad it up and I can squish it, right? You see that? How that clay is really wet. So I'm going to try to trim out this lump. Trimming tools, I'm just using this loop tool. When you're, as you get more advanced, you would want to feel these tools and see how sharp they are, because the sharpness makes a difference. That makes sense to everybody? It does make a difference. So I'm coming here, I'm trimming. Now I'm always trimming on the side that's facing away, same rules apply, right? And so I'm trying to trim this flat. I want a dead flat just because that's me, right? For you, it may not matter, but I can't often tell you what matters to you. Right, so let's make this a very clear point because this is super important. What matters to you is what makes it yours, right? If you don't care about making it really flat, then you don't really have to do this. Some of you may purposely put finger marks, like you know how you can put your finger there and go outward and you can have a spiral outward finger mark. Some people love that, and if that's important to you, then that's what you should do, right? And don't, like, I may try to tell you stuff or something, but if in your heart that's what you know you want, then you need to do that. That makes sense as a general rule, right? And I give general instructions, but it's up to you to interpret this back, to take this information and then redigest it back into your work, right? To interpret what I'm doing is what's important for how it needs to work with what you're doing. That makes sense to everybody? So here we go. So the issue is going to be is that this clay is wet on this side, right? This clay is this wet on this side. When I flip it over, it's going to be even wetter on the bat side because that's stuck down against the bat. So what we may need to do is we may need to start this trimming right now, and then maybe I'll trim it again at the end of class. What we're going to do is check it out. So you see I'm trimming, slowly trimming this down, and it turns out to be a little bit or a lot more clay than you think sometimes, because even though it's a very slight go upwardness, right here is a slight, just very gentle, like bump upward, like here, like cresting right about there. It turns out to be a lot of clay because it's a wide area, right? It's not like a lot of clay when you're trimming the outside, but it definitely is more clay. I'm a little bit surprised at how much clay I end up trimming out of these things sometimes. All right, so you notice that I'm being very careful. If you look closely, I'm being very careful. I don't know if you can see that line, but I'm being careful to stop short here of this curve, right? Because it's flat, 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 flat. And then when we get to here, it starts curving up. I have to be very gentle about how, you remember how careful I was when I was throwing this about establishing that curve. And for me, how this flat edge and then how the side of the plate or the bowl is, how they come together is super important. Like some of you it's going to be different. Some of you may want a sharp turn, right, where it just goes flat and then all of a sudden, bam, that angle starts. So it's a tight angle. For me, I like it to be a very gentle, like there's not even really a point where it starts for me, right? It just all very gradually, right? So the first second of where that curve starts to go up is infinitely small, right? And then it starts going. So this is a very gentle ramp up. So I have to trim that now because I've lowered this part down a little bit. I trim. I have to trim that in because you can see there, I don't know if you guys can see it, there's a little bit of a trim line there now. So I have to trim that down. Can you guys see it on the TV? All right, it's hard to see. So maybe it's easier to see maybe there. Can you guys see it there? Oh, there it is. I could see it there. Right, you see that? There's a little bit of a trim line. And for me, it is minuscule. But to me, that's a huge difference. I got it personally. This is my personal struggle, right? What makes it mine is I have to deal with that, right? In the same way when I was throwing it, right? So ideally I wouldn't have to trim anything at all, right? And I probably wouldn't have on this one. It was close enough, but now since I trimmed it, there's a little bit of a bump there. I have to deal with it for myself, right? So that I can live with this piece of pottery and not be ashamed every time I look at it. Right? That makes sense because that's what it is. Like this will last for 1,000 years if you take care of it, right? And some person may dig it up and they'll see your name on the bottom and your special signature stamp, boom, and they know that that's John Hasegawa, and they said John Hasegawa didn't care about that, right? That makes sense? And I would feel bad because I do. That's what's important to me. So here we go. Let's back that off. So I have to be very careful. I'm going to spend some time trimming this. So I can't come in there with a straight part now anymore and trim, because if I do that, it's going to trim above and below. So I have to switch to a curvy section. So I'm just going to come at this. So you see how I'm holding the tool in a very awkward way, because that's the curve section of the tool. Now I know we have other curve tools, and we'll show you the other trimming tools here in a second. And I'm going to show you another way to do this with another tool in a second too. So here I use the curve section. I can very lightly trim that out. Now, no matter what you do with this tool, you can see that there's more lines there, right? So what am I doing? I'm actually making it look worse for a second to remove material. And then I'll come back with a metal rib, right? So it's closer, even though you can see more lines. And then I'll come back with a metal rib to smooth this out. Because you know how when you trim something, it looks trimmed, right? The thrown bit that you didn't trim looks different than the bit where you trimmed, right? So that's where you could do this metal rib. And so at first, I'll use it like a trimming tool. So what do I mean like a trimming tool? I know that you've done this. If you were in my class, we've done this a little bit before. If you weren't in my class, I don't know. So we're going to teach you this. If I flex this, you see how I'm flexing it, bending it, without flexing it, bending it all, it's very like, it's very noodly, right, in all directions, right? But if I flex it in one direction, it gets stiff, right? It gets hard. It doesn't want to bend now. I can't bend it this direction and this direction at the same time, right? It adds rigidity. So now it becomes a hard thing. And if you look at that edge, boy, that edge is really narrow. And so this, you can use this like a trimming tool. So only if it's mostly perpendicular to the surface of the travel that it's in contact with. So I'll do it over here so you can, well, first let me just sweep this stuff out. So you see it's kind of hard to get this stuff out. So you can first just very lightly use this, and it will catch everything, and then you can sweep it out. Because what I don't want to do is, as I'm trimming, sometimes this stuff will end up being forced back down. Now it's almost clean, so there. All right, so see how it's easy. Now I'm going to flex this and use part of this curve. And this curve, and as I flex this, the curve changes, right? If I flex it in the right way, I can get it so that I can trim this smooth, right? And if you look at it, the contact surface is really broad, right? You see that? It's contacting a lot of clay, where this guy, right, it can be really a narrow contact surface. So it leaves a furrow when it's trimming. That makes sense? this guy, I can curve it, and you can see I can have a very large or bigger, and if I have a big flat space, I can even do a big flat space like that, right? So then I use this thing and I hold it at a perpendicular angle, 90-degree angle. I try not to use big college words when I'm doing this because I know people get a little freaked out because you had geometry and whatever, and then it would traumatize you. So I try to avoid, but I don't know another word for this, right? So you got to hold it at a right, even right angle may freak people out, right? So then I come in and it's flexed a little bit. You see that? It's flexed. So I use my 2 fingers and I push down in the middle of my thumb, and then see here, you'll see the back end view of that here on the screen here, and I come in like that, and you can see it's picking up some clay there. See that? There. And then, so I'll do it here. I'll just do it now more broadly, and you can see where it's trimming because you can see some lines are lighter than others, right? So it's trimming, so on the screen there, you can see it's trimming here and here, but not trimming there. So I want to keep doing that until it starts trimming all the way around. So here, let's go. So there, there. So it's getting close, it's getting close, it's almost there. Now, a couple safety tips. This guy can get super sharp, meaning this edge here can get super sharp, like it can, like a razor blade sharp, because this is steel, right? And it's already thin. And then what am I doing? I'm pushing it against there, and this is slightly abrasive. So that thing is like going like that and creating a sharp edge there. It could be so sharp that you could, if you do this, if you touch this in the wrong way, like rub this rib this way against yourself, you could cut yourself and not know it. You ever do that kind of thing where the thing's so sharp you cut yourself, you didn't know it, and then you keep going? Or sometimes you cut yourself and you're like, ow, that hurt, but then you look and there's nothing there, so you're like, I'm fine. And then you start doing stuff, and then all of a sudden there's like blood everywhere on everything you've touched. It could be one of those cuts, so just be careful with this, just warning. Right, so here I'm just coming through and just trimming this away like that. There we go. So you can see that each time. So when I wipe this away, I take my hand, I take my thumb. Now, some people believe this is not a good practice, meaning that I'm doing this in a dangerous way, but I'm going to show you the way how I do it. This is not the safest way, right? Because some people believe you shouldn't have your hand going in it like what. So I take my hand, and as long as I'm wiping away from the edge, right? Wiping away from the edge, I can clean that off, right? If I do this way, right? If I do that way, I can catch my skin, and it could shave off a layer of skin, and that is nasty. And they call that the technical term is an avulsion, right? Where you have a cut that's going parallel to the surface of the skin. And then those are nasty cuts and prone to infection. All right, so here I'm still doing that. Sorry, that wasn't ceramic-y at all. Now, the other way you can do it, if I scared you enough, you can take any other tool, right, and just wipe it away, right? So, but that's not the way I do it, because it's not the way I do it, because I'm lazy. Okay? So it's feeling better. So you see that for me, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to deal with it. Now, this still looks a little bit trimmed. So now, since I'm there, I can feel that the form is basically, no, it still needs a little bit of work right there. Avulsions are no fun. So I look a wilderness first aid class, and that's how I learned that. Because you had to know the different sorts of wounds, and then the tendency to how to treat them, right? Back in the day. All right, so it's feeling good. So this still feels a little trimmed. So the thrown surface has a look to it. So we want to make it look like it's thrown, not like I trimmed it. So instead of holding the rib like this to the surface of the clay, I'm going to take the bend out. You see, I'm going to leave it flat, and then I'm going to push the rib and let the rib bend down like that against the surface of the clay. You see that, everybody? So why is that important? Or what's the analogy here? Think about this. Let's say you have a cake, and then you put strawberry frosting over the whole thing, and you're making this for a family member, maybe your mom or dad or sister or something. And then they come up to you later, it's for their birthday, and they say, hey, I didn't want strawberry frosting. I told you I wanted chocolate. So now you have to get all that strawberry frosting off. You will hold the spatula against the surface of that cake and scrape it off that way, right? That makes sense? So that's what I was just doing, scraping clay away. Now let's say they come up in a different, slightly different scenario, and they said, yes, strawberry, that's exactly what I want. Now, as a good cake decorator person, you want to smooth that frosting out. You don't want to look all blobby like you just slapped it on there. What you do with the spatula in that case is you lay the spatula flat and let it kind of glide across the surface, right? That's the way how you smooth out that surface to make it all look beautiful, right? And not like you just slapped it on there with like a spoon. So that's what I'm going to do here is I let the rib like that. I don't put a flex in it. I let it lay flat like that. And then I just push down like that and let it travel across the surface. So you see how that metal rib just like lays down. So I do that all across here, and what does that do? It removes all the trimming. This clay that we're using, because the Christie Lombard clay is so good for this, right? It smooths out so beautifully. Some of you that are using more of a stoneware type clay that has bigger particles in it, right? Like sand and what we call grog, which are hard chunks, like little rocks, little sand things. Those things, right, when you're trimming have a tendency to drag around the clay. You see those fine lines. This one really doesn't have that much. And then you see by compacting that surface down, it looks like it was all thrown. I'm trying to remove all signs that I trimmed it, right? Now this is another personal choice, but in general, this is what a lot of people do. That makes sense? A lot of people do this. There we go. All right, so look, oh, that looks so good now, right? Just as if I was an awesome thrower to begin with, right? Does that make sense? That I want it looking like you do every trick you can to make the things look more like the way you would want them to be. All right, so now I'm gonna flip it over. Inside is done. So how do I flip this over? You need another bat, and you can see that I have a foam bat here, right? So why is that important? Is because that this is probably too big to set on the wheel, and then for trimming plates we can use a foam bat. So I'll place this bat upside down, foam side against the rim like that, and then I'll sandwich these two guys. So this is important because oftentimes if you just try to pick up your plate, it will taco to get, like if it's too wet, it'll just start folding on you, and that's bad. So you see that? So I sandwich, and then I sandwich these two together, and I flip it over really fast. Now, you'll see this. It'll probably stick to this bat. So you see when I lift this guy up, we'll get down low for this. This is great. The camera thing is awesome because it allows you to see so well, right? So when I pick this up, I think the plate will stick. So you see how the plate is not coming off. Now, a couple things we can do. We could try just wiring it off again. I could flip it over, try to run the wire through, and then it'll come off. But let's see if doing it this way, if I flex this bat, right, by pushing down my thumbs in the middle and fingers on the outside, and I flex it like that, sometimes the plate is rigid enough that it will try to stay flat and it'll peel off. Let's try that. Sometimes it takes a couple of tries. There, so you see how it came off. Why? Because it already was peeled off from the outside, right? Does that make sense? I could see light through this because remember it was like that sponge effect. The plate had already cupped a little bit, and then the middle part was the only part that was stuck. So sometimes it just needs to let some air in. And so by flexing this bat a little bit, if your plate is too wet, that won't happen, right? All right, so now I get to do this. So why is it on a foam bat? Because I didn't talk about that. I can put it on any bat I wanted to. The foam bat is for trimming, and I don't have to put clay lugs around it. The foam, the plate sinks into the foam bat enough, and there's enough weight there that it won't shift around on its own. I very easily could have put this on a regular bat to do this, right? But I wanted to show you this. All right, so then the only problem with this is I got to find the holes. Oh, someone marked them, and I got to make sure those holes line up. And we have a bunch of these foam bats over there on the shelf. Over there, you'll see them if you look. Okay, so this is down. Oh, shoot. We got to take a look at a couple things. I forgot. I skipped a couple of steps. So here, let me think about this, what step I want to go to. All right, I got to play around with this anyway. So that was to get it off so I can pick it up. All right, so trimming. What you have is this right now. I have this plate right here, my example plate that I cut in half. So, and you can see that this is the bottom, this is the rim. When you trim this, I would love it. You're basically going to parallel the inside of the plate with the outside, ideally, right? And then where do you put the foot? Because that's a huge range. You put the foot around where the plate's flat part ends and the scooping up of the side of the plate begins. You see that right around there. And it's okay if it's a little bit farther out or a little bit farther in. Do you guys see how that works? So then you end up with something like this in the end. You see that? There's my foot. There it is. Inside and outside of the plate are traveling in parallel. You see that? And then there's a foot left behind. Ideally, that's the best place. Why? Because you could make the foot smaller, right? But then usually the food and action is happening around the flat plate part. And then if you have a knife and you're cutting and stuff like that, that's usually happening on the flat part, right? If you move your foot too far inward, when you're doing that action and pushing down against the plate, it will flip, right? But in general, when you're sawing or carving, whatever, something, you're not doing it on this part. That makes sense? So it's just a functionality choice, not a choice about aesthetics, right? And you may make an aesthetic choice where you want to move the foot in. Just be conscious that that's what you're doing, right? If you don't have a thing, if you don't have a preference, just the rule of thumb is to kind of put it where the flat part ends, the opposite. So I need to check that part out. So I need to look here where the flat part ends is right about there. So what I do is I put my finger on the opposite side. I put my finger on the opposite side of each other, right? So you see finger there, and I put my finger, you see how they're opposite side of each other? And then I just take my fingernail here. Let's go to that one. Now I take here and I put my finger inside, put my finger outside, so they're opposite. You see that? This finger and this finger. And then I just take my fingernail and I mark it right there. Right? So that's my fingernail mark where around the outside of the foot needs to be, or should be. So then I'll plop this baby back down. Boop. All right, and then I gotta center this. Ooh, I must have knocked that. So here we go. So then I center this. And it's the same thing. So on the foam, it shouldn't slide around once I get it centered, but I have to center it still, so wobble. And then you can see that there are lines drawn on here, so you can see, and I'm centering to this part. I'm not centering to the rim. Sometimes your rim and the base aren't aligned. So it'll take a minute. If I had a good story, I'd have something prepared to tell you while I was doing this, because you guys know what I'm doing. I have a good video on how to tap center on my YouTube channel, so feel free to go there. That's a skill. Tap centering is an awesome thing to learn. Wobble, wobble. It's taking a while. All right, so I think we'll just have to tap center it a little bit. So it's a little bit harder to tap center on. All right, we're good? All right, so the first thing I do, let's get my needle tool out, is I'm gonna kind of draw a line on here. Now, do I draw a line on everything? Sometimes, but most of the time not. But I'm gonna draw a line here so you guys can see it. That's where my, that's where the, my fingernail mark is. So I think that'll be the outside. I think that'll be the inside. And so I get to trim away all of that. So we're gonna bring out a couple tools now. Let's bring out the Sureform tool, or this tool, or this tool, and then we got the other tools out. So first of all, we're gonna show you this. A lot of you guys have seen this. So Sureform tool is a great tool for just trimming the awesomeness. I was gonna say snot out of something, but you can just jam and trim. So I get to trim away all this stuff. Get to be pretty active here, and so here we go. So this ends up being a lot of material, right? Because this is really big around. right? So trimmy, trim, trim, trimmy, trim, trim, trimmy, trim, trim, trimming, making a mess. Oh, this stuff right here that's trimming off, if you need to make slip, this makes great slip, by the way. Attaching slip. We don't really talk about that too much in my class, but if your teacher told you what to do, if you had a good teacher and they showed you what that was, you can make it out of this anytime. There we go, almost to the line. A couple of things you should think about is that this is really wide, right? This will probably be the widest thing you've made so far. So the wheel speed has to be slower, right? Because it's a lot of material passing through this. There's a lot of material going through here, right? So it has to be, there we go. All right, so I'm almost to the limit of what this tool can do. There we go, almost to the limit. All right, so I think I'm there. All right, so now let's talk about these other tools. So in this box, we're going to introduce you guys to some new trimming tools if you haven't seen them before. This is our special box of advanced ceramic tools. We haven't talked about what's in here. Some of you guys might already know what's in here. There's just a lot of tools that are kind of one of a kind, meaning we have all those other tools over there, the regular trimming tools, but we have these more fancy trimming tools like this. These are our Dolan trimming tools, and they look a little different. And then we have a couple different types. This is a slightly cheaper. These are slightly cheaper versions. We're not going to talk about those. You can see we have two of these, right? These two tools are exactly the same because I love them so much we bought an extra one. Just so that if one person had them, and then so let's just bring out a couple of these and we'll talk about these right now. All right, so now I get to use, oh, where is this box kept? It's kept around the corner from the needle tools, next to on the bookshelf there. Not on this bookshelf, but around the corner. By the needle tools. All right, so let's do these guys here. So what are these? This is just a flat piece of metal, but if you look, it's been sharpened right here, right? And sharpened right here on this face, and then sharpened right here on that face. So let's pass that one around, since it's a duplicate. And why is that? This tool works a lot like this tool, because look at this. This tool, right, if you look at the regular trimming tool, is flat here and flat on the inside here, right? But you can see it has an angled face here that's been sharpened, and it goes down that direction, and it has an angled face here, and it goes down that direction. So if you look at this tool, what is it? It's almost exactly the same, right? It's flat, right? And then it's flat on the inside, it's flat on the inside, and this has an angle here, and then this guy has an angle here. So this tool does the same kind of job that this tool does, except this tool is better, made out of better material, stays sharper for longer, right? So it's just a better tool, handles better. This tool is the same thing as this tool here, the square one, except it just has a continuous sharpened surface and it goes all the way around. We will use both of these. All right, so let's start with this one. These tools are just better for trimming, and you hold it just like you would a regular trimming tool, right? And then you kind of will have to play around with it. I would recommend that you try this, and then we just trim with this just like normal. You see that? You'll feel a slight difference in how they trim, but since they stay sharper for longer, they're just better in general. I like them better, right? Because the tools are always in better shape for doing the things that you want to do. Now we'll do another trick with the other trimming tool that I'll show you here in a second. So I'm just trying to trim this down. So what I'm trying to do is remember, right, what the interior shape was. So I know that this isn't a good example because the interior shape of this is doing something different, right? But I'm trying to trim this so that the inside and outside are parallel. And since I went through and I marked it with my fingernail, I know about where the flat part starts, right, of the interior. And I also kind of remember how thick it was, right, to start with. So I can do some more trimming. Let's switch back to this one just for a sec or two, right? So I'm going to use that, start trimming the outside of the foot a little bit. There we go. There we go. The reason why I'm using this tool now is just because it's a little bit tight in here to try to fit this tool in there. There we go. Let's get down close so you guys can see the trimming action. Right, so you see the outside of the foot has come out, and just remember that the clay is really moving, right, when you get out here. Yep, okay. And now I'm going to start trimming that back in. So I'm trying to remember what that inside angle was of the edge of the plate, right? So I'm trying to trim that as the same. It's right, it's all guessing, right? But I know from experience, I kind of have a good guess. And so your interior will look different. So the trimming that you do will need to look different, right? Now, people aren't in general, this is the way how I think about it. And this is why these are my priorities, is for me, cups, I try to make thin, light, because they're moving around a lot with them, right? A cup, you have to pick it up to interact with it, drink, and set it back down. Right, you hardly ever go up and leave it on the table out of it. You don't do it that way, right? So the weight of a cup is critical to how it performs, right? Because you have to move around with it all the time. Plate, you just get the stuff on there, you get it over the table and just sits there, and then you interact with it sitting on the table. So weight is not a critical issue. So I'm not as super duper concerned about getting this thin and beautiful and light and everything. I'm concerned about how it looks, right? But for me, the lightness and heaviness of it is not as big an issue, but it can be. So I'm not trying to make these super light, right? By trimming and making, but I am trying to make it even. All right, so I'm feeling like I'm getting in the neighborhood, right? So how do I know? Because I know that that edge of the bowl was pretty straight. It wasn't like this giant bowl-y shape that went up and straight or whatever. So I'm trying to think at the profile. So let's get down and look at the profile. I'm beginning to think that that profile is close, right, to what I had, right? So there is a little bit of a blemish here. You see that? There's a little bit of blemish there. So I'm just going to trim that out to tidy it up. Now I also could use the rib for this. So maybe we'll end up using the rib for this to get that out. Like that. And this is a little bit tricky because it's a little bit of a confined space, but we're going to make this work somehow. I guess that's what we're going to do. All right, so I'm thinking I'm pretty happy with this. So we'll come back and maybe we'll tighten up this, tidy up that. So now we're going to trim the inside bottom, right? So let's do that. Trim the inside bottom. Give me a second here. All right, so trimming the inside bottom, we always start from the middle and go out, and it's even more critical for a plate because if you trim the outside here first, then try to trim the inside, the whole thing could collapse because this is pretty wet, right? So I'll trim always starting from the middle and going out, which we always do anyways. That's the way I teach it. Check this out. For those of you that weren't in my class, I don't know if I showed my class this, my beginning class, is that we trim, most people trim with this part of the trimming tool, the flat part. So the first part of these tools to get dull is this, right? And one thing I learned in undergrad is that this part is sharp, always, right there, and then this pointy part is sharp, right? Because people never hold it like this and trim. So you see that? I'm going to use that part of the curve and trim. And it was just out of desperation because all our trimming tools at my old school were all super dull, and they were doing that. And then if you flip it over and use this part, it does require super awkward hand position at first, right? But so you see how I'm having to hold it like differently, but I've trained myself, and believe me, if you can train yourself to do it that way, there is a whole bucket of sharp tools there, right? Because almost nobody will trim this way. Secret John Hasegawa tip, and that has nothing to do, that's definitely something that you would not do at your home or if you had your own tools, because you wouldn't use these that much or you would sharpen them. But so here, going again, So this clay is a little wet. It's a lot wet. So you see I'm starting to get there. There's something interesting. There's like a lump here. Is it just me hitting? Could be just me hitting a chunk of clay that's coming around. No, yeah, it's just a chunk of clay. So you see how I'm mainly trimming this part. If you look, if you can see it, this part is bowed downward a little bit. This part's up a little higher. So I'm mainly hitting this part the most, and then I'll come back here and flatten this area out a little. I think it's actually collapsing. So let's see. Ooh, it's collapsing. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a break. I'm going to hair dry this a little bit and see if we can get it to dry out a little more. It's just a little bit early to trim. So we'll be back in a little bit. All right, so let's keep trimming this guy. So here I dried it out a little. I'm going to come back here and trim, keep trimming this. So it's much better. It's not. So why we stopped for a little bit is that this part was collapsing. Right, so I'm coming back and I'm really taking some time and trimming this area smooth. Right, and the one thing you'll notice is that I'm spending most of my time trimming the middle. Right, I'm not trimming the edge of this yet. I want to get the middle of this basically done because of it's still a little bit wet. Right, you see that? So I'm basically finishing that as I go out. Because if I trim off this outside part, the whole inside, it'll make the whole structure even weaker. So I'm focusing on this part, and then I feel like that part's getting done. So I'm going to travel out, and now I'm going to concentrate here. So here I have my foot marked off where I want my foot. So I'm going to start attacking up to that line of my foot. There we go. So you see my foot starting to emerge. And this is a lot like doing a bowl, except it's just bigger, right? There we go. We'll keep this foot pretty simple today. We're almost there. So if you haven't noticed, what's the lesson that we learned from today that's different about plates is that the drying is critical, right? We haven't talked on how the pace of the drying, because it's such a structurally wider, right? The drying, it doesn't dry as quickly. There's more uneven drying, and that, ooh, I just felt the whole thing shift for a second. I don't know. It just all of a sudden changed a little bit, like up and down. So I got to be careful. It just felt like it's trying to collapse there. So I got to really take it easy with the pressure. So that might mean I'm not going to have the upper. Ooh, it's right there. I feel it. So it could be, all right, so I'm getting close to done, that means. And I wish I could do more. So now I'm going to come back and focus on the outside of this. Tidy up the outside of that. And then for me, once again, the transition between how the edge of the plate comes in and how the vertical part starts is really important, just like how that's important on the inside too. So I'm going to come through and tidy up this a little bit, and I'll come back and tidy up this. Now, let's talk about these tools again. So the one thing that's good about these tools that's different from these regular loop tools is that this tool here has a sharp edge here and then a sharp vertical edge. So I can bring it in and I can trim this vertical edge and then this part of the plate at the same time. You guys see that? So I'm trimming, and then I could lift it up and trim the vertical side, and then I could fold it down. You see, I'm using both this edge here and this vertical edge here at the same time to trim this up. So I love using this tool. Super efficient. All right, so then I'm just gonna round this off, and then we'll be done. So here I'm gonna round this foot off like that, give it a little bit of a turn here. And once again, that makes it more it withstands impact. If I leave it at a sharp corner, it's not gonna do very well. There, and then I'll round the inside of this, and then we'll be done. Yeah, and then I'll smooth it a little bit. We can use a little bit of water and a sponge. Like this. Yeah, done. Smooth, 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 and then we'll be done. And so now I've trimmed off a lot of that structure, the clay that was holding all this together. right? So it's important now. I usually can't just pick this plate up. I have to go back to sandwich mode, right? So I get a clean bat now and I flip it over on top. I'm gonna pick up this whole thing and flip it over like that, and now it's on the back. If I just try to grab it, right, it could once again bend and become like a taco or something, right? Because it has no good way for me to pick it up. And then I'm done. I let this dry slowly, right? What do I mean by slowly? I can even bag it up again, because these plates in general are structurally weak, meaning they have their bowls, cups, and stuff are much stronger. These have a tendency there's a couple different ways they can crack. They can S-crack down the middle, which is bad, right? They can crack, and they could do a crescent crack where it just cracks in the direction of the wheel, or they can crack inward across the rim this way, right? So, and those are a lot of things that don't happen with cups. Cups are inherently strong. Cylinders have a lot of strength to them. When I'm trimming cups, I just leave them out, right? I throw cups in the morning, I leave them out all day, and I can come back and trim them at night. Plates, especially this big, need some time to chill, and because it's such an uneven drying where the rim dries first and then the inside dries so much slower, I want to keep them in alignment with each other drying wise. So I try to cover them up again if I can, so that it chills out, so everything dries together, and that helps prevent me from cracking. Any questions? All right, so trim some plates.